At the company's annual gala, Arthur Sterling, drink in hand, introduced me to a new client. He smiled, his gaze sharp, then added, "Eleanor here, handles the minor paperwork, keeps the coffee flowing." My face burned. The client's polite nod was a cold blade, cutting through my perceived worth, exposing me as nothing more than a glorified servant. "Some people," Arthur murmured, "just don't know their place." I first met Thomas behind the espresso machine at the Hawthorne Street Cafe. I was 19, pulling shots and wiping down counters, feeling the days blur into a routine of steam and sugar. He came in most mornings for a black coffee, a worn copy of some classic novel tucked under his arm. His sweaters were always a little frayed, his hair perpetually in need of a comb, but his eyes held a kind gentleness that drew me in. He taught English at the local high school, a job he spoke about with quiet passion. We talked about books, the weather, and eventually, our lives. The conversation stretched from hurried morning exchanges to long evenings spent on his apartment's small porch, sharing cheap beer and watching the streetlights flick on. We fell in love with a comfortable ease, like settling into a well-worn armchair. Our wedding was simple, held in my aunt's backyard. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and summer rain. Thomas wore his only good suit, a dark navy one, and I wore a dress I bought off a clearance rack, white lace that felt right for the moment. We promised each other forever under a makeshift arch of wildflowers. Our life together began in a modest two-bedroom apartment near the river, a place with creaky floorboards and a perpetually leaky faucet in the kitchen sink. We got a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier mix we named Gus, who filled our small space with boundless energy and the constant patter of claws on linoleum. Thomas's teacher's salary and my barista wages covered the bills, mostly. It was a life built on shared meals, quiet evenings, and the simple comfort of knowing someone was always there. But the simplicity started to feel a little thin around the edges. I saw Beth's vacation photos from Maui on social media, her smiling face against a backdrop of turquoise water. Rachel had just bought a townhouse, a real fixer-upper. But it was hers. They were moving forward, it seemed, while our life felt stalled, predictable. The thought often pricked at me. A tiny, persistent needle under my skin. Then Brenda called. We met for lunch at a new bistro downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick and overpriced salads. Her left hand sparkled under the restaurant lights. "Ted proposed last week," she announced, holding up a diamond the size of a robin's egg. She spoke about their new house, a 3-bedroom colonial with a 2-car garage, already in escrow. Every detail, from the granite countertops to the walk-in closet, felt like a direct comparison to our small apartment, its leaky faucet, and our shared closet space. My smile felt stiff, my salad tasteless. A sour, unfamiliar envy coiled in my gut. That night, watching Thomas grade papers at our kitchen table, the yellow glow of the lamp illuminating the soft lines of his face, I saw a contentment I no longer shared. He looked up, smiled, and asked about my day. I told him about Brenda and the ring, the house. He listened, nodded, then shrugged. "Good for her," he said, turning back to a student's essay. There was no flicker of ambition in his eyes, no desire for anything beyond the life we already had. He was happy with enough, and I, suddenly, wanted more. A lot more. The decision formed quietly, a steel-hard resolve. I would take control. We needed a new job, a better job, one that could lift us out of the comfortable rut we'd settled into. I started looking online during my breaks at the cafe, scrolling through listings, past all the usual administrative roles. Then I saw it. Executive assistant to the CEO, Sterling Industries. Big tech, double my current salary, maybe more. It felt like a sign. My credit card had only a few $100s of available credit left. I walked into the fanciest boutique at the mall, the kind of place I usually only window shopped, and picked out a charcoal gray pantsuit, Italian wool, crisp lines, perfect fit. It cost more than a month's rent. The cashier looked at me with a polite, practiced smile as I handed over the card. An investment, I told myself, the words feeling a little hollow, but the suit felt powerful in my hands. The interview was on a Tuesday morning. Sterling Industries occupied the top 3 floors of the tallest building downtown. The reception area was all polished concrete and glass, hushed and bright. Arthur Sterling himself met me. He stood as I entered his office, a man who seemed to fill the room without effort. He was impeccably dressed, a dark suit that tailored perfectly to his frame, a tie the color of a winter sky. His handshake was firm, his grip lingering just a moment too long. He looked at me with an intense, assessing gaze, a look that made my carefully rehearsed answers feel a little clumsy, a little raw. He asked about my experience, my ambitions. I spoke about efficiency, organization, a desire to grow. He listened, a slight smile playing on his lips. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You're hired, Eleanor." Just like that. The swiftness of it made my heart thump. A mixture of exhilaration and a tremor of something else. I called Thomas from the bus stop, my voice bubbling with an excitement I couldn't contain. "I got the job, Sterling Industries, executive assistant." There was a pause, a beat of silence on his end. That's wonderful, El. Really. But what about the cafe? And the hours? It's a big company. His reaction was muted, a little flat. Not the unbridled joy I'd expected. My enthusiasm deflated, a balloon pricked by a pin. Later that evening, he tried again. "We're happy, aren't we? Things are good as they are." He picked at a loose thread on the couch cushion, not looking at me. "We have enough, don't you think?" I didn't think so. Not anymore. I waved his concerns away, my mind already fixed on the polished glass and the double salary. "I just want more, Thomas. For us. Isn't that okay?" I didn't wait for his answer. My new office was a corner cubicle, but it felt like a palace. Sleek, modern, bathed in natural light. My coworkers wore smart suits and spoke in hushed, confident tones about market shares and quarterly projections. They were ambitious, driven, and I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't known I was missing. I was finally in a place where people wanted things. Arthur took me under his wing quickly. He'd stop by my desk, not for a task, but just to ask how I was settling in, to offer a piece of advice, a subtle compliment about my quick grasp of things. "You pick things up faster than anyone I've ever had, Eleanor," he'd say, his voice low, his eyes holding mine a beat too long. There was an unspoken tension, a current running just beneath the surface of our professional interactions. It was unsettling, but also, I had to admit, thrilling. One Tuesday, just as the evening light began to fade from the city skyline, he called me into his office. "Eleanor, we have that big presentation for the Osaka partners first thing tomorrow. Could you stay late? Help me iron out the last details?" He didn't wait for an answer, already pulling out his phone. "I'll order some sushi. And a nice bottle of sake. My treat." The last words hung in the air, a small, intimate invitation. The sushi was artfully arranged, glistening with color, and the sake, warm and smooth, began to loosen the tight knot in my stomach. Arthur poured another small cup for me, his eyes never leaving mine. "So, your husband," he began, a casual question that felt anything but. "What does Thomas do again? Teaching, isn't it?" I nodded, picking at a piece of salmon. "English teacher, high school." Arthur smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his lips. "Ah, yes. A noble profession. One that truly shapes young minds. Though I imagine it's not exactly lucrative. Is it? Not exactly building an empire." The way he said noble profession made it sound like a polite euphemism for something quaint and ultimately insignificant. It tapped into my simmering resentment. The sake made my tongue feel thick, but also unburdened. The words spilled out, an admission of the financial anxieties that had always gnawed at me. I spoke about the endless struggle to make ends meet, the dreams of a bigger house, a more comfortable life, the kind of life Brenda flaunted. Arthur listened, his gaze unwavering, leaning forward, elbows on the table. He reached across, his fingers brushing my arm, then gently covered my hand with his own. His touch was warm, reassuring. "Eleanor," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper, You deserve so much more than that. So much more than living hand to mouth, sacrificing your dreams for, well, for anything less than what you're truly capable of achieving. His thumb stroked the back of my hand. A small, intimate gesture. He offered me a ride home. My apartment was a 20-minute drive from the office, but the offer felt loaded, an extension of the intimate atmosphere we'd created over sushi and sake. I hesitated, a flicker of guilt, but the thought of the familiar bus ride back, then the walk down our quiet, unremarkable street, felt suddenly unappealing. His car, a sleek black sedan, waited outside, gleaming under the streetlights. The leather seats were soft, the interior quiet, smelling faintly of expensive cologne. The tension between us was a palpable thing. A humming current in the confined space. He drove slowly, not taking the most direct route. The city lights blurred outside the window. He spoke again, his voice lower, closer. You're an incredibly valuable asset to me, Eleanor. More than you know. More than you've probably ever been told. He pulled the car to the curb a block from my apartment building, the engine idling softly. Then, he leaned in, his eyes dark in the dim light, and his lips found mine. The kiss was sudden, intense, tasting of sake and something sharp, exhilarating. I pulled away, my breath catching. The surprise, the suddenness of it, shocked me into a brief moment of clarity. Guilt, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of the evening. Arthur, I whispered, my voice barely audible. He looked at me, his gaze unreadable. Life is short, Eleanor, he murmured, his thumb brushing my cheek. Far too short to settle for anything less than what truly makes you happy. His words echoed in the quiet space of the car, unsettling and persuasive. I let myself into the apartment, the keys rattling loudly in my shaky hand. Gus gave a soft woof from his dog bed, but didn't stir. Thomas was asleep on the couch, a stack of graded papers fanned out on the coffee table beside him, his reading glasses perched on his nose. The lamp cast a soft glow on his face, illuminating the faint lines around his eyes. A pang of something, a mixture of guilt and a familiar, dull disappointment, tightened in my chest. He looked so vulnerable, so unaware. That night marked the beginning of a double life. I threw myself into work, arriving early, staying late. I told Thomas it was about dedication, about proving myself at a demanding new company. They expect a lot, Thomas, I'd say. My voice clipped, avoiding his gaze. It's how you get ahead. He accepted it, albeit with a growing worry in his eyes. He started noticing other changes. My preoccupation, my distraction at dinner, the way my phone seemed to cling to my hand even on weekends. You seem different, Elle, he'd say, his brow furrowed. Are you sure everything's okay? You seem stressed. His concern felt like an accusation. I'm fine, Thomas. I'd snap, my voice sharper than I intended. I'm just working hard, something you wouldn't understand. The words were cruel, meant to wound, and I saw the hurt flicker in his eyes, but I was too caught up in the thrill. The newness, the dangerous pull of my life at Sterling Industries, to truly care. About 3 months into my new role, Arthur called me into his office. Eleanor, he began, leaning back in his executive chair, a casual ease in his posture. There's a critical business conference in New York next month. Top-tier clients, major deals. I need you there. You've proven indispensable. My heart gave a little leap. New York, he continued, almost as an afterthought. I've already booked the accommodations for us. It'll be a tight schedule, so sharing a suite will make logistics simpler. The implication hung heavy in the air, unspoken but entirely clear. I spent the next few days in a haze of internal argument. The thought of New York, the conference, the escape from the ordinary, tugged powerfully, but the suite, the shared room. It was a line I knew I shouldn't cross. Yet, the allure of the unknown, the excitement, the dangerous thrill, felt too strong to resist. The mundane reality of my life with Thomas, the quiet disappointment, felt like a cage. This was a chance at something different, something vibrant. I told Thomas about the trip to New York, the important conference. It's a big opportunity, Thomas, I explained, my voice carefully modulated. They've booked separate rooms for all the staff, of course. For privacy. He looked at me, a faint shadow of worry still in his eyes, but he nodded. Just be careful, El, he said. New York can be a lot. I hugged him, the lie a cold, hard knot in my chest. But the thought of what awaited me in the city was a powerful anesthetic. In New York, the hotel was grand, far more luxurious than anything I'd ever experienced. Arthur met me in the lobby, his smile confident, his hand warm on my back as he guided me to the elevators. The suite is magnificent, he said, pressing the button for the top floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. When we entered, it wasn't 2 rooms, but one expansive space. A living area, a dining table, and a single, enormous bed, dominating the bedroom area through an open archway. I figured it was time to drop the pretense, Eleanor, Arthur said, his eyes on mine. I felt a surge of nerves, but also a strange, exhilarating surrender. The city lights twinkled outside the panoramic window. He took my hand, drawing me closer. Our affair began there, in that high-rise suite, and it became a frantic, exhilarating whirl of stolen moments, clandestine meetings in empty conference rooms, hurried kisses in stairwells, passionate encounters after long workdays, the hum of moral unease drowned out by the thrill of the forbidden, the intoxicating promise of a different life. The careful balance of my 2 lives began to fray. Mornings were a blur of hushed phone calls and rushed goodbyes to Arthur, followed by forced smiles and casual conversation with Thomas over lukewarm coffee. Evenings were worse. My patience wore thin. Every question from Thomas, every familiar habit, felt like an irritation. I was distant, my mind always somewhere else, constructing elaborate lies or replaying moments with Arthur. Gus, our dog, seemed to sense it too, watching me with a sad, steady gaze. The apartment, once a haven, now felt like a cage. One Saturday morning, the inevitable happened. I'd left my phone on the kitchen counter while I showered. A careless mistake. When I came out, wrapped in a towel, Thomas was standing there, my phone clutched in his hand. His face was a mask of disbelief and raw pain. The color drained from his cheeks. His eyes, usually so kind, were wide and wounded. He didn't have to say anything. The screen glowed with Arthur's name, a text message visible. Missing you. Can't wait for tonight. The words hung in the air, damning and undeniable. Eleanor? His voice was a choked whisper, barely recognizable. What is this? What have you done? I tried to deny it, a frantic scramble for words, for an explanation that wasn't there. It's nothing, Thomas. Just a work thing. He sends odd texts sometimes. But the words were weak, crumbling under the weight of his gaze. My shoulders slumped. The game was over. The confession tumbled out, a messy, ugly torrent of words. I told him everything. About the late nights, the New York trip, Arthur's promises, and my own gnawing dissatisfaction. I just felt trapped, Thomas, I blurted, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. I wanted more. I need more than this life. Arthur understands that. He can give me the life I've always dreamed of. Thomas just stood there, his face crumpling, a silent testament to the wreckage I'd created. He didn't shout, didn't rage, he simply looked at me, his eyes full of a broken trust. And then he turned and walked away, retreating into the bedroom. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The next morning, the bedroom door was still closed. I heard the muffled sounds of movement, then the distinct click of a zipper. Thomas emerged, his eyes red-rimmed, a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't look at me directly. I need some space, Eleanor, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I can't be here right now. He walked past me, opened the front door, and then he was gone. The apartment felt vast and empty, the quiet suddenly deafening. Gus whined softly from his bed, sensing the shift. The absence. My phone rang, It was Arthur. Eleanor. Everything all right? You sound a little off. He sounded completely oblivious, his voice cheerful, untroubled. A flicker of doubt, cold and sharp, pricked at me. Had I made a mistake? Was this all a grand, foolish gamble? I pushed it down. I called him back, my voice shaking slightly as I explained what had happened. The confession. Thomas leaving. He listened, his tone shifting, becoming soothing and understanding. Eleanor. I'm so sorry you're going through this, but you know this is for the best. You deserve to be happy. Come to my place. You don't have to be alone. His offer felt like a lifeline. With a strange mixture of relief and numb determination, I packed a single suitcase. My clothes, a few books, photographs of my family. But none of Thomas. I walked out of the apartment, the door clicking shut behind me, leaving behind 10 years of shared life, a dog, and a heartbroken man. I told myself I was making the right choice, that this was the path to the life I was meant to have. Arthur's penthouse was everything I'd imagined and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city, sleek modern furniture, and a quiet sense of opulence. It felt like a movie set, a place where people like me didn't just visit, they lived. For a few days, the initial excitement was a heady rush. I felt validated, chosen. This was my reward, my new beginning. Then Thomas called. His voice was raw, broken, the sound of a man who had been shattered. I've been thinking, Eleanor, he said, the words barely audible. I want a divorce. The phone went quiet. The finality of the words severed me completely from my old life. From the woman I had been. There was no going back now. My parents were devastated. My mother, usually so composed, cried openly on the phone. My father, a stoic man who rarely showed emotion, expressed his disappointment with a quiet, cutting finality. I always thought Thomas was a good man, Eleanor. A decent man. You had a good life. His words felt like a judgment I couldn't escape. My friends were split. Brenda, true to form, was openly judgmental. I can't believe you'd do that, Elle. To Thomas, of all people. It's just not right. Beth, ever the pragmatist, offered a strained concern. Are you okay? Really okay with all of this? But kept her distance, the unspoken judgment clear in her carefully chosen words. I found solace only in Arthur. He held me, whispering promises of a brilliant future, of the life I had always dreamed of. He painted a picture of success, travel, and luxury. A world where my desires would finally be met. It was a powerful, intoxicating vision. The divorce papers arrived, stark and official. I signed them, the pen scratching against the legal forms, formalizing the end of my marriage. Each stroke of the pen felt like a seal, a deliberate act of choosing one path, one man, over another. My fate, it seemed, was now inextricably linked to Arthur Sterling. Life with Arthur was, at first, everything I had convinced myself I wanted. The penthouse became my domain, with cleaners and personal shoppers taking care of every mundane task. We traveled off in Paris for a weekend, a yacht in the Caribbean, ski trips to Aspen. I wore designer clothes, attended glittering social events, my arm linked with Arthur's, feeling the admiring glances, the envy of other women. I quit my executive assistant role, Arthur insisted. You're my partner now, Eleanor, he'd said. And I'd believed him. But the days, once filled with the demanding rhythm of work, now stretched out in an endless expanse of leisure. I found myself restless, a growing sense of idleness settling in. Arthur's attention, once so intense and focused on me, began to dissipate. He was often late, sometimes not coming home at all, claiming last-minute business trips or crucial, all-night negotiations. When he was home, his phone was rarely out of his hand, his conversations hushed, distant. I saw the way other women, younger, more vibrant, flirted with him at parties, and saw the subtle reciprocation in his eyes. He didn't try to hide it much. In the quiet of the sprawling penthouse, I found myself thinking of Thomas, I missed his steady presence, the way he'd listen patiently as I talked about my day, the simple comfort of Gus curled up at the foot of our bed. I missed our messy, comfortable apartment, the shared laughter over burnt toast. The luxuries surrounding me felt cold, sterile. I tried to connect with Arthur's friends, the other wives and girlfriends at the country club or charity galas. They spoke of private schools, exotic travel, and investments, their conversations a foreign language I couldn't quite grasp. I felt like an imposter, a barista in a silk dress, always on the outside looking in, judged for my provincial background and my less-than-pedigreed past. Then came the morning sickness, a wave of nausea so profound it stopped me mid-stride. The positive test stick lay on the marble countertop, stark and undeniable. I was pregnant. A surge of fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me, immediately followed by a desperate, illogical hope. A baby. Our baby. It could be the thing that finally solidified everything, that truly made us a family. It could bring the warmth, the connection, the stability I craved. I waited until Arthur was home, later that evening. He listened, his face carefully blank as I told him. He was distant, his initial response a long, unsettling silence. Then, "Are you sure, Eleanor?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture. "There are options, you know. It's early." The words hung in the air. A cold blade, my hope, so fragile, began to crack. "No," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "I'm keeping it. This is our chance, Arthur. A real family." I looked at him, searching for something. Anything. In his eyes. He looked away. He finally agreed, a sigh escaping his lips. "All right, Eleanor. If this is what you want." We announced the pregnancy at a small dinner party, his arm around my waist, a forced smile on his face, his enthusiasm clearly an act. I called Thomas, my heart thumping, a strange impulse to share the news, to seek some kind of closure, or perhaps just a kind word. The phone rang 3 times, then he picked up. "Hello?" His voice was guarded. "Thomas? It's Eleanor." A pause. I wanted to tell you something. I'm pregnant." There was a click. He had hung up. The dial tone hummed in my ear, a flat, final sound. My parents remained distant. My mother's calls grew less frequent. My father's quiet disapproval a heavy, constant weight on my conscience. They sent a brief, formal card when we announced the pregnancy. But there was no warmth, no genuine joy. 9 months later, Daniel arrived. A healthy, robust baby boy with a surprising tuft of dark hair. Holding him in my arms, feeling the tiny weight, the soft warmth against my chest, a profound sense of purpose washed over me. He was mine, undeniably mine. And in that moment, all the glitter and pretense of my life with Arthur faded into insignificance. Arthur, however, showed little interest. He'd glance at Daniel, offer a perfunctory pat on the head, then hand him back to the rotating cast of nannies he'd hired. "He's a good boy, Eleanor," he'd say, almost as if he were discussing a business acquisition. His focus remained on work, on his social life, on the other women. My once glamorous life now felt profoundly lonely, filled with the echoes of Arthur's frequent absences and chilling indifference. The penthouse, with all its luxury, felt like a gilded cage. I looked at Daniel, sleeping peacefully in his expensive crib, and a cold realization settled in. The life I deserved. With Arthur was beautiful on the surface, but it lacked the one thing I now understood truly mattered: genuine warmth, connection, and love. Daniel grew quickly, a bright, cheerful toddler whose laughter was the only genuine sound in the cavernous penthouse. He was a ray of pure sunshine. A small hand gripping mine. His innocent wonder at the world. A stark contrast to the growing gloom of my life with Arthur. My days revolved around him, his feedings, his naps, his clumsy steps. He was my anchor, my sole purpose. Arthur, however, was drifting further away. His behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd disappear for days without explanation. His phone dead, or simply unanswered. When I finally reached him, his voice would be curt, impatient, offering vague excuses about urgent business. The excuses wore thin. Whispers started reaching me. Vague rumors about Arthur's ventures at the city's exclusive poker tables. The escalating stakes. I started seeing the truth, little by little. Arthur was gambling. Heavily. And he was losing. Then came the formal-looking envelopes, tucked discreetly into the mail pile, addressed to Arthur. They spoke of overdue payments, defaulted loans, massive debts accumulating like dark clouds on the horizon. His business, Sterling Industries, which once seemed unshakable, now had a frantic, desperate edge. The hushed conversations among his remaining colleagues spoke of financial mismanagement, of shaky investments, and looming disaster. One afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Unknown number." I answered, wary. "Eleanor? My name is Susan. Susan Sterling. I'm Arthur's ex-wife." Her voice was calm, steady, and held a weariness I recognized instantly. She laid it all out. A history lesson in deception and charm, the gambling, the string of affairs, the reckless spending, the way he always left a trail of financial wreckage and broken hearts. "He sweet-talked me too, Eleanor," she said, her voice devoid of bitterness, only a quiet resignation. "Promised me the world. He's a charming man, a charismatic man. But he's a black hole, darling. He'll suck you dry, and then move on to the next bright thing." I confronted Arthur that evening, the weight of Susan's words heavy in my mind. He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Susan. God, she's still bitter, isn't she? Just a jealous ex-wife, Eleanor. Don't listen to a word she says. She'd say anything to make me look bad." He kissed my forehead, tried to charm his way out of it. But the unease had taken root. Deeply unsettled, I began to look. Quietly, secretly, I accessed his financial records, using the passwords he'd carelessly left lying around or mentioned in passing. What I found was a spiraling disaster. Hidden accounts emptied, assets sold off without my knowledge, the numbers bleeding red. Our joint account, the one I thought was secure, was practically bare. The money for Daniel's nanny, the household expenses. It was all gone, funneled into his desperate attempts to recoup his gambling losses. "Arthur," I said, holding up a printout, a stark statement of a liquidated investment account. "What is this? What have you done with everything?" He froze, the easy charm vanishing from his face. A heated argument erupted. Words thrown like stones. Accusations and denials filling the luxurious space. Then, as I stood there, demanding answers, demanding to know where our money, Daniel's future, had gone, his mask slipped entirely. His eyes, usually so calculating, blazed with a terrifying, unbridled rage. He raised his hand, his arm arcing back, and for a split second, I saw it, the violence, the raw, ugly brutality of the man I had chosen. He didn't strike me. His hand stopped, hovering inches from my face, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But the illusion was shattered. Completely. The gilded cage was now just a cage. In that moment, a cold clarity settled over me. I had to leave. Not just for myself, but for Daniel, for his safety. This was not the man I had chosen, not the life I deserved. This was a nightmare. I began to plan my escape, moving with a quiet, desperate efficiency. I sold a few pieces of jewelry, small, expensive trinkets Arthur had given me, for cash. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Just as my meager escape fund was taking shape, the hammer fell. Sterling Industries officially declared bankruptcy. The news broke like a dam, and within days, the creditors descended. I watched, numb, as movers systematically stripped the penthouse bare. The designer furniture, the expensive art, the gleaming appliances, all gone. The symbol of my dream life vanished piece by piece, leaving behind a stark, empty shell. Arthur, now desperate, manipulative, and a shell of his former self, tried to convince me to stay. He clung to me, his promises of change hollow, his pleas ringing with a pathetic insincerity. "Eleanor, Please, I'll change. I swear, we can start over. We can fix this. His words were empty echoes in the vast, empty rooms. Life has a way of showing you the true cost of your choices, especially when those choices involve betrayals and grand illusions. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Arthur's desperate pleas for me to stay were hollow, transparent. I saw the fear in his eyes, but it was fear for himself, not for Daniel or me. The illusion of his charm was gone, replaced by the stark reality of a desperate, broken man. While he slept, a heavy, drunken sleep, I quietly packed, not the designer clothes, which were mostly ill-suited for the life ahead, but practical items, Daniel's favorite blanket, a few changes of clothes for us both, and the meager cash from the sold jewelry. In the dead of night, the city silent below, I called a taxi. Daniel, warm and heavy in my arms, stirred, but didn't wake. I left the empty penthouse, the echoes of a life I'd chased and lost, without a backward glance. The taxi drove through the quiet streets, carrying us away from the wreckage. With nowhere else to go, I ended up at a women's shelter in a different part of the city, a place of stark cinder block walls and communal bathrooms. The fear was a cold, constant knot in my stomach. The shame was a burning flush on my cheeks. I, Eleanor, who had once dined in Paris, was now here, utterly dependent, just like Susan had warned. The truth hit me with a physical force. I had no job, no money, and no safety net. Arthur had taken everything, or rather, I had given it all away. I found a minimum wage job at a diner, scrubbing grease from counters and pouring endless cups of coffee. The hours were long, the work thankless. My hands always smelling faintly of stale oil. Every dollar earned was stretched thin, barely enough to cover the shelter's small fee, and Daniel's basic needs. It was a brutal contrast to the opulence of my recent past, a daily confrontation with the harsh reality I had fled to. My pride had kept me silent for too long, but eventually, I called my parents. The conversation was strained, filled with pauses and my mother's quiet sniffles. My father's voice was clipped, his disappointment palpable even across the phone lines. "You made your bed, Eleanor," he said. But then, after a long silence, added, "We'll help, but you have to understand, this is on you." It wasn't the embrace I'd fantasized about, but it was a lifeline. A few days later, a check arrived, small but significant. My mother called again, her voice softer this time. "There's a small place, near where your cousin lives. It's not much, but it's clean." With her help, I secured a tiny, run-down apartment in a working-class neighborhood. The paint was peeling, the carpet worn, but it was ours, a space where Daniel and I could be alone. The loneliness, however, was a constant companion. In the quiet evenings, after Daniel was asleep, the apartment felt vast and empty. I regretted my choices, a constant, nagging replay in my mind. The image of Thomas, grading papers on our old couch, his quiet contentment, now seemed a virtue I had carelessly discarded. I missed the comfortable simplicity, the shared silences, the unquestioning love. I missed Gus. To make ends meet, I started working 2 jobs, the diner in the mornings and cleaning offices in the evenings. Daniel spent his afternoons with a kind neighbor, a woman named Maria, who had a brood of her own children. I'd pick him up, exhausted, guilt gnawing at me for the hours he spent without me. I saw other families in the park, intact, mothers and fathers pushing swings together, and felt the crushing weight of my self-inflicted isolation. The guilt over Thomas, over my parents, was a heavy cloak I couldn't shed. I had been so selfish, so blind in my pursuit of something glittering and empty. I yearned for connection, for the simple stability I had once taken for granted. The peace Thomas had found in his humble life, the steady love he offered, seemed like a forgotten treasure. On Daniel's 3rd birthday, I baked a cake, a lopsided affair with too much frosting. We sang, "Happy Birthday," in our tiny living room, just the 2 of us. Maria and her kids joining briefly. Daniel clapped his hands, his face smeared with frosting, radiating pure joy. But for me, the celebration felt hollow. A stark reminder of our solitude, of the family I had broken, and the future I had traded for a lie. Years passed, blurring into a rhythm of work and single motherhood. Daniel was now in elementary school, a bright, energetic boy with a kind smile that reminded me so much of Thomas. I had found a job as a bookkeeper for a small local business. The numbers a welcome, predictable order in my otherwise chaotic life. It was a step up from the diner, but we were still just scraping by, living month to month in the same small, run-down apartment. An invitation arrived in the mail. Daniel's first-grade class was putting on a school play. The simple card, adorned with crayon drawings, was a stark reminder of the normal life. The stable, two-parent home that I couldn't provide for him. I saw the other children at pickup, their parents smiling, connected, and the ache in my chest was a familiar, persistent companion. I knew I needed to change more than just my financial situation. I needed to reconnect, to find a way to heal the gaping wounds of my past. For Daniel, and for myself, I started attending a support group for single mothers at the community center. In a room full of strangers, sharing stories of struggle and resilience, I slowly began to open up. The words of my journey tumbling out, hesitant at first. Then with a growing sense of release. It was hard, painful, but necessary. After weeks of deliberation, my finger hovering over the send button, I composed a tentative email to Thomas. It was short, filled with the raw emotion of apology, acknowledging my past actions, my profound regret. I didn't ask for forgiveness, only for news of Daniel. I know I have no right, I wrote, but I hope he's well. A reply came a few days later, equally brief. Eleanor, I've moved on. Daniel is a happy, healthy boy. No anger, no recrimination, just a quiet finality. But then, a flicker of something else, a small opening. He deserves to know who his biological mother is. Eventually, when the time is right, that small hint was all I needed. I started attending Daniel's school events, lingering at the back, a face in the crowd. I watched him during recess, his dark hair gleaming in the sunlight as he played tag with his friends. I saw him on stage during the school play, a small, confident knight in a cardboard helmet, his voice clear and strong. He was thriving, surrounded by a warmth I could only observe from a distance. I learned he was smart, curious, and kind, so much like Thomas, and my heart ached with the weight of the missing years. One afternoon, after a parent-teacher conference, I gathered all my courage. Daniel was putting on his backpack. Thomas was helping another child tie their shoe. This was it. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs. Daniel, I said, my voice soft but firm. He looked up, his eyes wide and curious. My name is Eleanor. I'm your biological mother. The words hung in the air, sudden and heavy. He looked confused, then to Thomas, who stood up, his face carefully blank. Daniel's small brow furrowed. My biological mother. He was confused but curious, as children often are. He asked questions, simple, direct questions about his past, about his other father. I answered as truthfully as I could, the words feeling inadequate, clumsy. Thomas, after a long, silent moment of observation, eventually agreed to a meeting. We met in a public park, a neutral territory, the kind of place filled with families, laughter, and the distant sound of children playing. The air was tense, heavy with unspoken history. I poured out my regrets, my apologies, the full extent of my selfishness and betrayal. I was so wrong, Thomas, I said, tears blurring my vision. So incredibly wrong. I was blind, chasing something that wasn't real. I abandoned you. I abandoned our life. For nothing. What had tappered. He listened, stoic, his hands clasped in front of him. There was a flicker of residual pain in his eyes, a ghost of the man I had wounded, but also a quiet strength, a settled peace I hadn't known he possessed. I've found happiness, Eleanor, he said, his voice calm, steady, with Clara Hayes. She's been a wonderful mother to Daniel. The news was a fresh wound, a reminder of the life I had forfeited. He looked at me then, his gaze direct. For Daniel's sake, I'll allow limited, supervised visits, always with Clara or me present. His well-being is paramount, Eleanor. That's the only condition. The words were a mix of mercy and stern boundary. I felt a wave of relief, followed by a renewed pang of pain. This was it. This was the consequence. The past couldn't be undone. The damage, irreversible. My choices had carved a permanent path, and this, a small, carefully rationed space in Daniel's life, was all I was allowed. The scheduled visits with Daniel became the bedrock of my week. Every Tuesday evening, every other Saturday afternoon, they were often awkward at first, filled with the careful politeness of Thomas and Clara, and Daniel's shy curiosity. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to build a rapport with my son. We talked about his school, his friends, his latest interests. I learned to listen. Truly listen. Without judgment. Just a quiet presence in his life. I quickly learned that Daniel was happy, truly happy. Thomas and Clara had built a stable, loving home. He spoke of Clara as his mom, a term that brought a bittersweet pang to my chest. She was a kind, practical woman, and Daniel clearly adored her. I saw the way she looked at him, with an undeniable maternal warmth, and knew she was everything I hadn't been during those crucial early years. It was a consequence I had to accept, a constant, gentle reminder of what I had given up. I continued to work hard at the bookkeeper job, meticulously saving every extra dollar, determined to prove myself worthy of Daniel's respect, even if I could never fully earn back his primary affection. The apartment remained modest, but it was ours, a testament to my own hard-won independence. I made slow, deliberate efforts to reach out to my parents again. Phone calls turned into occasional visits, awkward silences gradually giving way to tentative conversations. My mother still held a quiet sadness, but my father, in his stoic way, seemed to see the change in me. He started talking about the garden again, about small, mundane things, a sign of a slowly mending bond. A sense of quiet purpose began to settle over me. The ambition that had once driven me, the frantic chase for more, had dissolved, replaced by the simple, profound desire to provide for Daniel, to be a good mother, to live a life of integrity. It was a far cry from the glittering penthouse, but it felt solid, real. I saw Thomas and Clara often during pickups and drop-offs. Their connection was undeniable, a comfortable ease built on shared affection and mutual respect. Their home, glimpsed through open doors, radiated a warmth that ours never had. In those moments, I felt a profound sense of loss, a quiet ache for the life I had so recklessly discarded. But I also saw their happiness, undeniable and earned, and understood it was a direct consequence of my choices. He had moved on, found a better life, and he deserved it. The loneliness still struck, sometimes fiercely, especially on holidays, or Daniel's birthdays, when the joy felt tinged with the knowledge of what could have been. The regrets were always there, a low hum beneath the surface of my days, but they no longer consumed me. My time with Daniel, though limited, became my priority. I was present, attentive, trying to make every moment count. I helped with his homework, listened to his stories, cheered him on at school events, always from the sidelines, never trying to intrude on the family unit he already had. I also started volunteering at a local community center, helping with their after-school program. It was a small thing, but finding solace in helping others, in contributing to something beyond my own small world, brought a surprising sense of peace. The children's laughter, their eager faces, filled a void I hadn't known how to address. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my parents began to trust me again. They saw the genuine remorse, the quiet strength I had found, the consistent effort I was making. It was a long road, but the cracks in our relationships were beginning to heal. I also found a small, steady group of friends, co-workers from the bookkeeping office, other volunteers from the community center. We shared coffee, talked about our lives, our struggles, our small triumphs. It wasn't the glamorous social circle I'd once aspired to, but it was real, built on shared experiences and genuine support. A new support system, carefully constructed piece by piece. Then, when Daniel was a teenager, The questions started coming. "Mom," he asked one evening during our weekly dinner, "tell me more about Arthur, my other dad." He had a curious, thoughtful look in his eyes. I took a deep breath. I recounted my past honestly, not shying away from the painful truths. I spoke of the allure of money and status, the mistakes I had made, the betrayal of Thomas, the emptiness of Arthur's promises, the eventual downfall. I didn't sugarcoat it, hoping to teach Daniel valuable lessons I had learned the hardest way possible. I looked at my son, a young man now, and the clarity was absolute. The glamorous life I had chased, with all its glitter and false promises, was never, ever worth the profound cost of my family and my integrity. Years melted into seasons, and Daniel, now a tall, thoughtful young man, was preparing for college. He had been accepted into the state university, a testament to his intelligence and the stable home Thomas and Clara had provided. I took immense pride in his achievements, a quiet, internal joy that filled the spaces in my modest life. My relationship with Thomas and Clara had evolved into something resembling a fragile peace, a respectful co-parenting arrangement built on the shared love for Daniel. We spoke only when necessary, about school forms or tuition payments, our interactions always polite, carefully neutral. The sharp edges of the past had dulled, but the scars remained, a permanent landscape in our lives. I sat in the crowded high school gymnasium, watching Daniel walk across the stage to accept his diploma. Thomas and Clara sat a few rows ahead, a united front. I was alone, but not truly. My heart swelled with pride and a bittersweet ache. Sharing in his joy, even from a distance, was enough. I reflected on the full circle of my life. From the innocent, simple love I had found with Thomas, the comfortable warmth of our shared life, to the glittering, empty promises of Arthur, and then the long, arduous road back to this complex, quiet reality. It had been a journey filled with choices, each one carving deeper into the path I now walked. My life remained modest, a comfortable rhythm of work, community involvement, and the cherished moments with Daniel. I found contentment in the small things, a perfectly balanced ledger at work, a quiet evening with a good book, the laughter of children at the community center. The ambition that had once consumed me had been replaced by a grounded peace, a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. I visited my parents regularly now. Our bond had healed, strengthened by time and my genuine remorse. We didn't dwell on the past, but the unspoken knowledge of it was always there, a quiet understanding between us. My mother would bake my favorite pie. My father would talk about his garden. And in those simple moments, I felt the warmth of family. Restored, I had, finally, made peace with my past. The regret was a part of my story, a permanent shade in the tapestry of my life, but it was not its entirety. I understood that I had paid the price for my choices, a steep one. But in the long, hard climb back, I had found a form of redemption, a quiet self-acceptance that had been absent for so long. One rainy afternoon, I sat at my small kitchen table, a pen in my hand, and began to write a letter to Daniel. I poured out my heart, detailing my journey, my mistakes, the painful lessons learned, the truth of Arthur, the depth of my love for him. It was a testament, a warning, a legacy of my own human fallibility. For him to read later. When he was ready, I found comfort in the quiet, mundane rhythms of Midwestern life, the very things I had once scorned, the predictable seasons, the familiar faces at the grocery store, the steady hum of a community built on hard work and common decency. It was here, in this ordinary world, that I had found my extraordinary truth. I understood now that true wealth wasn't in material possessions, or grand titles, or the approval of others. It was in connection, in integrity, in self-worth, and in the enduring, unconditional love of my son. My character was marked by the wisdom of hard-earned experience, a testament to resilience, and to the profound, humbling lessons learned from my own mistakes. Occasionally, I would see snippets of Arthur Sterling's downfall in the news, another bankruptcy filing, a mention of legal troubles, his name fading into obscurity. But I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a quiet understanding of the inevitable consequences of a life built on sand. I dedicated my life to being a good mother, to Daniel, and a contributing member of my community. I volunteered, I helped, I listened, I lived with the quiet knowledge of my choices, carrying the weight of a whisper, a poignant reminder of the path I chose and the family I almost lost. Eleanor closed the letter to Daniel, carefully tucking it into a worn wooden box with other keepsakes. The box sat on a small, unadorned shelf in her modest apartment, a testament to a life rebuilt, not on grand ambitions, but on quiet resilience. She thought of Thomas, of Clara, and of Daniel. Their lives had moved forward, forged in the aftermath of her own destructive choices. She felt no bitterness, only a deep, abiding understanding of the landscape she had created. The Midwest provided a steady, predictable rhythm she now cherished. The changing seasons, the familiar faces at her bookkeeping job, the steady companionship of a few trusted friends from the community center, these were the simple, tangible anchors she had once dismissed as ordinary, but which now formed the true fabric of her contented existence. She had learned the hard way that the most valuable treasures were not found in luxury or status, but in integrity, connection, and the quiet dignity of living truthfully. The echoes of her past remained, a subtle whisper in her memory, a constant reminder of the profound cost of wanting more than she had, and of the enduring, hard-won peace she had finally found.